Good afternoon and welcome to Parenting Tips for Challenging Times. Our focus today is challenging behaviors. It's sponsored by Clues, Minnesota Act Early, Help Me Grow, and Ramsey County's Early Childhood Initiative, also known as RECE. I'm Nancy Lee, the coordinator of RECE, which supports Ramsey County residents who are parents with young children, particularly preschool. I also want to call out Clues, who supports a group of Latina moms that are helping Clues to develop community-based solutions to improve access to high-quality services of early care and education in the community. Today, Clues is also providing translation services, and we have muted everyone, so for questions, please use the chat box. So now I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. First, Kiran Sheikh is a licensed school psychologist who has worked in the field of education for 9+ years with a particular focus in early childhood. She's a mother of 2 young children who challenge her each day to learn and grow in the field of early childhood and who remind her to take time to enjoy the little things in life. Next, Kim Bailey, PhD, has been in the field of early childhood education for over 17 years, including 6 years of experience in higher education. Kim has played many roles in her life. She's been a trainer, a teacher, a mentor teacher, an education coordinator, program supervisor, adjunct instructor, and professor. But her favorite role and most proud role she has had was being a mother of 4 children. So Kim's favorite pastime is playing Dungeons and Dragons with her family. Finally, Sonal Desai-Red is a former high school principal, now doing foster care full-time. She's a mother of 3 biological children and several foster children. She grew up and still currently lives in St. Paul and really enjoys the time she has had with her young children during the COVID pandemic, but would absolutely love to get back to some sense of normalcy, as we all would. So let us move right into our discussion today. I'll start with Kiran. Tell us in general, how might the pandemic be affecting children's behavior? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I always do that every single time. First, I just wanted to say thank you guys for having us here. And I'm looking forward to being able to answer the questions and kind of address any questions that the community has related to behavior and challenging behavior. But when we think about COVID, I think it's important to think about the fact that COVID has really disrupted every single system that we work with, right? It's disrupted our home environment where children are home from school now. It's just disrupted our professional environments where people are home from work and trying to figure out that balance between working from home and parenting at home as well. It's disrupted the medical field, the medical environment. There's just so many areas and facets where COVID has had such a major impact. And really what it's created is just this ongoing sense of uncertainty. And this kind of lack of predictability, right? Like we can't figure out like what's going to happen tomorrow, what is happening today. Every day, like when you watch the news, there's a new update. And so I think that when we think about young children, they really thrive off of routine and they thrive off of consistency. So it's funny because like you'll hear me, I compare kids also to adults a lot. And adults, I think, are the same. Like we thrive off of routine, we thrive off of consistency, we thrive off of being able to know and figure out what to expect in the next moment. And I think that because COVID has created this sense of inconsistency, it has this impact on us as adults and children as well. Children in particular, though, I think, especially those that are, the early childhood age range, their brains are just developing, right? Like we know that before the age of basically kindergarten, 90% of a child's brain is developing. And what their brain is doing is trying to figure out kind of what is safe for me and what is comfortable for me. And I think being in a time where things are so, inconsistent and so questionable, it creates a sense of distrust with the environment. And so I think that the impact of what you see from that is really what manifests. And this is why this topic of challenging behavior, a lot of times that feeling of distrust can create challenging behaviors in children. And so what we may see is children having trouble with sleep. Maybe they're developing certain anxieties and fears that are translating into other behaviors. Maybe you might have children who are having so much idle time at home. And so now they're engaging in things that, maybe jumping more on the couches or getting into more fights with their siblings, things that you never really expected beforehand. And so I think that keeping that whole idea in mind, that it does have that great impact on our children. I think it's also important to think about like the effect of what is happening for children is really dependent also on the type of environment that we're creating in our home environment, because I think that children feed off of their environments very much. And so if we as adults are complaining about COVID or watching the news all the time when our kids are around, and we're showing that level of stress in ourselves, that translates to maybe a higher, more negative effect on our children. Whereas if we're like, oh, and we're like saying, for example, that we're stuck at home, this is so horrible, right? Versus saying, wow, we get to spend more time together now. We get to play more activities together, or we get to do more things together, or we get to try and do something different today. I think that perception and environment also is what could potentially impact. Overall, though, I do think like that idea of inconsistency and a lack of predictability creates that sense of distrust, which is why it's important for families to kind of integrate routines that are consistent at home, even though it's the hardest thing to do. I mean, I have my own kids and I struggle every day. But just keeping in mind that idea of trying to make sure children feel safe and creating routines really is how we can think about like that, the effect of that, of the pandemic on children.
Yeah, that's, that idea of what we say while we're at home, oh, this is so horrible. We can implant ideas in our child's mind as opposed to that idea of, wow, this is we're all here together. Let's find something to do or find something for you while I do this. I love that concept. So, Kim, would you share with us, how you think children might be reacting given the traumatic events such as Mr. Floyd's death and other violent images in the media these days? How is that affecting children?
Hi. First, I want to say thank you for having me join this webinar as well. Well, during times like these, young children have a difficult time identifying, expressing, and managing their own emotions. And young children have these difficulties because they're just not developmentally there yet, right? So they just don't have the skills yet. So with so many feelings and so many violent images, children may have difficulty internalizing and externalizing what's happening in the world around them. So when they're internalizing, these are things that they're taking in. These are the images. These are things that they're hearing, and they're trying to figure it out inside of them, and then externalizing is the actions that they show outside in the environment, right? And so it's important to note that some of these behaviors may closely resemble adults' behaviors and symptoms too, right? So, however, we must remember that even though behaviors may closely resemble adults, they just don't have the developmental ability to process like an adult do. And so some of the things, some of the reactions or some of the behaviors that may be showing that you will see in children's, maybe they're having a hard time sleeping, or maybe they're just sleeping too much. They might be anger. They might show anger and they're easily agitated. They have fear and they're scared. They may overeat or have a lack of eating. focusing can become very hard. So it's just an example is it could be hard for them to focus about school right now because of all of these things that are going on in the world around them. And also in the middle of a conversation, it may seem like they may be zoning out or they might not be listening to you, but it's because they're still internalizing all those things. And then with everything that's happening, is giving them anxiety, right? And it can give them, they can be depressed, they can have depression as well, and they may look like they are sad a lot. And it's a feeling of lost in their environment, right? The world evolves around them. Their environment around them, that's their world. And so when things are thrown into chaos, like what, and you know, it's not, there's the violent images, there's the news, there's the pandemic all together, right? So now their whole world has just changed. And so there are also some children that would do something called a repetitive or post-traumatic play. And this is when children start to reenact the traumatic events that are happening around them. And so just an example of that is, you know, there's 42 grandchildren in my family with my 11 siblings, right? And we are watching the news a lot during this time and all the violent images, not thinking about what the children were taking in. And we started paying more attention to the kids because we had noticed one day that even my 3-year-old, not my 3-year-old, my niece, she's still my 3-year-old, but the children started putting knives around the house so that they can easily grab it in case somebody broke into the house. Or they were playing looting, but it wasn't just like cops and robbers. They were playing looting and they were doing violent acts because these are things they see in the news. So these are some behaviors that you may see from children from what is happening around them. And I think it's just important to note that, you know, as parents and adults, just being empathetic and being sure that you're proactive in your communication, because when that happened, we made sure to sit with our kids and actually talk about what's going on and talking about justice and talking about what's being fair and not fair. And so even as young children, they can understand that.
Wow, that's a beautiful example of how the child will reformulate what they're seeing and begin that acting out. Just, it's so wonderful the way that you as parents then notice that and were able to bring forward a technique to talk with them. So now, what does this bring up for you? What question might this bring for you?
So, you know, I think about this a lot, but we're 8 months into the year and the kids have experienced a pandemic. They have seen violence against the community. I live in a community that got burned down. They have, you know, not been able to go to school. And this is only 8 months into the year, and they have dealt with more in this 8 months than I've probably dealt with in my entire lifetime. And to try to explain to them what is the best way to explain all of it, not just the pandemic or just the racial injustice. You know, my little one loves basketball and they didn't play basketball. And how do I explain to my younger one that the basketball players felt like there are much bigger issues to deal with than to watch them play basketball in a way that they can understand?
So, it's okay for me to go, right? I don't know if Kim has something that she wants to say, but okay. Either way, I think that when it comes to conversations, I think Kim has that very valid point of that children are capable of having those conversations and understanding. But I think that when a child, for example, you know, has that disruption of, I would like to play basketball and I can't go play basketball anymore. I know socialization is a huge piece of not being able to see your friends, not being able to go to school. I think it's important for families to reiterate that this is a temporary thing. So making sure and reminding them that this is just for right now, and making sure that they understand that the reason why we're not letting you go and play basketball is because of germs, and because germs can lead to this, and making sure they understand that it's a desire to keep children safe. Because I think essentially, like when I was talking about like neurological development too, like with that feeling of safety, our brain is always wanting to keep us safe. And I think that having those conversations with kids about safety and about, like with my 4-year-old, we talk about it all the time. Like we can't go to the parks all the time because the equipment has all the germs on it. And so when I remind her that one day we will be able to, I think it kind of creates a sense of ease, like, okay, well, not right now, but at some point I will be able to. And I think even if it's like, we can revisit this conversation next week and we can talk about and see how things are going next week, and having those constant check-ins with children and those open conversations is definitely something that could be helpful with kind of remedying that increased level of stress that they may have with not being able to go on with like their daily routines and their the things that obviously they love to do, which is like playing, especially right now in Minnesota, the weather is amazing, and wanting to be outside and play in certain areas, it's hard, right? But I think having that open line of communication, and at the same time thinking of alternatives that could be done, that definitely too, like if there's a way to create some type of, impromptu basketball game at home, right? Creating like a positive alternative to what's going on might also be something beneficial.
Kim, would you like to add any other comment to that?
Well, I would like to add that, as you know, how we always say in early childhood that parents are the child's first teacher, right? And it's not because parents are teaching children academic things every single day. It's because they're watching you and they're observing you. And so they like to play you. They like to play mommy. They like to play daddy. They like to play auntie or grandma. And so it's important that during times like these, I myself, when I'm watching the news and all of these things are going on, it gives me a bit of anxiety. It makes me worry about what's happening around me, but it's important for us to remember to stay calm, right? And so the children can practice staying calm as well.
Mm-hmm. And when I think about this, yes, there's COVID and concerns that have come for racial injustice. In general, how do you figure out, what a child is trying to communicate through some behavior that may seem challenging?
So I think first and foremost, it's important to know that young children and even adults, again, when we engage in a behavior, we are trying to communicate something. So we were just talking actually before the session about, making children understand what's an emergency and what's not an emergency when you're on like a Zoom call. And the reality is that their behaviors are kind of a reenactment of what they're feeling. So when we're thinking about behavior and children using behavior as a means of communication, that actually starts really early. When children are infants and they're first born and they're crying in their cribs because they want milk, they want a diaper change, they want to be held, they are communicating through their tears and through their crying that they need something and that they want something. So when we think about, children engaging in certain behaviors, it's important to first believe that, yes, they are communicating something. But second, to really think about kind of what and why are they doing that. So it's really hard with behavior because behavior takes a lot of reflection. I always say how like parents and teachers, we're like investigators. When we are dealing with challenging behaviors or any type of behavior, we really have to put those binoculars on and figure out like what is going on deeper than just like what we're seeing. And typically when we think about kids, like they engage in behaviors for sensory reasons. So like, you know, I want something like food or something of that nature. I want to get away from something. So I don't want to do what you're telling me to do. So I'm going to engage in like crying or having a tantrum. For attention, there's actually an acronym called SEAT, which is the sensory, escape, attention, and tangible, that sometimes they might want your attention, or they might want something physical from, you know, I want a candy, I want a toy from the store, and that's why I'm engaging in a challenging behavior. So I think thinking about kind of like what could be those causes. So do you think that they want your attention? Do you think that's what, you know, they're looking for? That can help you kind of figure out what is causing that behavior. But another thing that we use in the classrooms, and Kim and I used to be actually colleagues in the past, so we use this a lot when we talk to teachers, is something called the ABC analysis, which is really thinking about like what is the behavior, right? So the A stands for antecedent, B, which that means like anything that's happening before a behavior, B stands for the behavior itself, and then C stands for consequence. So like if you really are thinking about your child having a tantrum, you know, taking some time at the end of the day to think about, well, they had a tantrum. What was happening right before they had that tantrum? You know, like what was going on? Was it that we were at a store and we were getting ready to leave and they wanted a toy and they didn't get a toy? Like what exactly was happening? And then thinking about what was the consequence. Because let's say, just using that example, your child is having a tantrum at the store, or I mean, and I know we're not at the stores anymore, but let's just say your child is having a tantrum because they wanted yogurt, right, from the fridge. And you notice like every time at like 11 o'clock, you know, that's an hour after they've had their lunch, it seems like they're always wanting some type of snack. So maybe an idea is to just give snacks earlier on so that you avoid that whole tantrum behavior during that time. So I think it does take a little bit of reflection, but using some of those tools of thinking about what is happening before and what is happening after, and then also thinking about kind of what is their purpose, like what are they getting from doing that, can help you figure out what they're trying to tell you with some of the behaviors that they're engaging in.
And so I'm just gonna piggyback on what Kiran has said about recognizing that behavior is communication, right? And so I want to acknowledge that behavior stirs a lot of emotions, not just from little people, but from parents as well, right? And so when a child is throwing a big temper tantrum, or they're showing violent behaviors, as an adult, we have feelings. So our first reaction may be wanting to go in and stopping it right away, right? Or like, and the way that we're reacting could be, I don't want to say violently, but like a bit harsh, right? Like when you're talking to them. So it's a good idea when these things are happening for you to reflect about your own feelings of those behaviors. And so, you know, all children want to behave well. We have to believe that all children want to behave well. It's just that they can't. And so they can't express what they're trying to say, or they can't express their feelings, or something's going on that we have to investigate to try to help them express themselves. And so, you know, these behaviors are messages and they are lacking particular skills. So many times they need an adult to guide them and support them. But it's important to also note that as a parent, or even as a early childhood professional, you have to reflect upon how those behaviors are making you feel. And so that next time you can, I call them static, right? Everything that's happening around you, or all the emotions are building back. So you can take a step back and enter the situation with a clear mind to support them, to get them out of that negative behavior that they're showing.
That's a great kind of metaphor to take a step back and then come back in for clarity to kind of clear out what you've been thinking. So now, what does this bring up for you in terms of your two and how they're interacting during this time?
So my two younger ones, on top of all of this that's happening, they have a lot of trauma. And so I totally, just listening to Kim say, that behavior is communication. In my situation, it is behaviors almost always. It's rarely being able to say what either one of my children feel they really struggle with that. And so I've learned what their behaviors are I learned to know what they're asking for from their behaviors, but it's really hard to move away from that. And how do you suggest moving away from behaviors being their mode of communication?
So I think when we think about, and just thinking about in your situation where you have children who have experienced a sense of trauma, like, yes, you're right. Like, those traumatic experiences are just going to translate to behavior, right? And I think it's hard, and I give you so much credit, Sanal, because the investigative work to even figure out like it was a sense of trauma, or this is what it means when a child is doing this. It's really hard to do that. Like, you are putting on an extra hat of being that investigator to figure that out. And I think though, at a very young age, children are able to kind of adapt and learn different techniques. And one of the things, like, we worked a lot with Kim and I both, is the pyramid model, which really talks about how children, one, are communicating what they need and their emotions through behavior, but also that children are teachable when it comes to behavior. And the reality is that most children need to be taught behavior, if not all. A lot of times in school systems, it's this idea that, well, you should know by now. Like, didn't your mom teach you, or didn't your dad teach you? But the reality is no, like, children really need, they need to be taught. And so in your case, I think that, and this applies to all, I have a 1-year-old that right now cries for everything. And it's a matter of kind of figuring out, like, once I know that this is what that need is, so this child is communicating trauma, like, what was that trauma? Was it a feeling of and this is big when it comes to trauma, is the lack of control. Like, when you're in a traumatic situation and a traumatic experience, you don't have control, and children want control, right? They want it. They need to feel a sense of control, which is why this whole pandemic has just been such a huge thing. And I think once you figured out that, right, and you figured out kind of what they need, then it's a matter of trying to create alternatives. If your child is able to communicate, having a conversation. And in Pyramid 2, there's this idea of kind of a bell curve. And the way that it is like, the sides kind of move up to the top. And at the top is where that behavior is happening. So if your child is experiencing and being reminded of a traumatic experience and they're having a tantrum, they're over here. Over here is not the time to teach something new. What it is you have to kind of take opportunities that are not during that time frame to teach something new. So having a conversation during lunch and saying, you were so sad and you were so angry, and that's why you were yelling, or that's why you were screaming. What do you think we could do different? Do you want to just come and give mommy a hug? Do you want to just, and figuring out what type of comfort does this child adapt well to? What alternative does he or she adapt well to? And kind of integrating that into the routine. A simple, and this is not a traumatic thing, but like, my 1-year-old cries for food. And so, if he wants something, he's yelling, he's screaming, he's and we're still working on it, but every single day we do the same thing. And that's another thing, the consistency. We do the same thing, where in our language, dedo means give me. And so I'll tell him, you want this? Like, say dedo. And so we're not there yet, but I know that over time, teaching this alternative, oh, you're so angry, you're so sad, oh, you're screaming, just come give mama a hug. Teaching that alternative could get to that point of them really understanding what they can do different. Because I think our role really is that whole idea of teaching them how to self-regulate, because sometimes they don't. And children who experience traumatic situations need that times like 100. So.
Andrea, do we have any questions from the audience that they would like to share?
Hi, everyone. So we have a question. Can you help us figure out when we need to ask for professional help? And also a comment, the pyramid model is amazing. and that's it.
So I have a rule of thumb, right? If you're ever questioning if you need professional help, you probably need to seek the answer out. Okay? Or if you have somebody in the profession that had mentioned some concerns, it would be good to talk to somebody who's professional in that area to help you out. Kiran.
No, I love that rule of thumb. I've never even thought of it that way. But yeah, if you tend to have those questions, then absolutely, you know, Help Me Grow Minnesota is the entity that kind of works with referrals, and they are wonderful with creating that avenue. So typically, what happens is when you do have these questions, you can sometimes just have your questions answered. It doesn't have to be anything that gets into a formal, you know, evaluation. So exactly what Kim is saying, if you have those questions, if you have just like an inclination that like, maybe something is going on and I just don't know what, I mean, and also like if you have one child and it's your first experience and, you know, you don't know what to compare it to, it's a great idea to kind of follow through and try to get some of that guidance. One thing to know for sure when it comes to professional help, especially when it goes through that avenue of Help Me Grow, because once it goes to Help Me Grow, it goes to the public school district, right? So wherever you're attending, so if you live in St. Paul, you most likely are going to go to St. Paul Public Schools. One thing to know when it comes to that is you have the ultimate right. So you can say, yes, you want an evaluation. No, you don't want screenings. You can kind of voice what you want. So just knowing that, you know, and I think Kim mentioned it before, that parents are that first teacher. Well, parents have ultimate rights too on their children. And so if you just want questions answered, I would highly recommend, yes, go through that Help Me Grow avenue, figure out a way where you can get those questions answered. And you never know. Sometimes it may lead to a need for early intervention support. And that's okay. You know, every child develops differently. Every child has different needs. And the reality is getting those needs met early on makes it more likely that they may not need that support later. Not saying that that always happens, because sometimes children do, you know, receive early intervention supports and then they do require supports throughout the remainder of their schooling time. But it's just important to know that if you can get yourself the support you need now, you could probably help and support your child further down the road to have less needs. So definitely, I think that, yeah, any question you have, seek it out, you know?
And always ask questions, right? Because the person who's going to advocate for your child is going to be you.
Yep.
It's okay to ask questions. It's okay, especially if your child, let's say they get on an IFSP or an IEP, right? It is okay to ask for help to understand what's written on there. And there's great programs out there to support you, like PACER, right? There's great programs out there to support you to navigate through these things. And so I just wanted to share with you guys that I'm kind of like the mom that had all those, right? So for example, my first son, I was looking at my son and he wasn't just proportioned right? The doctor didn't even notice this until I brought it up. It turns out my oldest son had hyperhemihydrotrophy, where one side of his body grew a little bit larger, faster than the other side. And so he had CAT scans of his tummy for the first 5 years to make sure that it didn't create a tumor. But the doctor didn't even notice that. But as a mom, I was looking at him and I was like, you know what? This leg is just a little bit longer than the other side. And then I have a child who's on an IEP, and he just graduated, but he stayed on the IEP the whole time. And then I had a little guy who was on a IEP for speech, and right after kindergarten, he didn't need speech anymore. So I have a sample of all those in my family, and early intervention is the best support you can get for young children, because you will have professionals coming in supporting them. It's just like for speech, right? A speech pathologist that would be practicing those needed sounds that may be missing.
Thank you, Kim, for sharing from your personal experience. the ways in which early intervention helped your family and your sons. It's so good to hear how they progressed from that. So now, what are you thinking around things that are happening with your young ones? What question might you have?
Um, this actually might sound like a very funny question, but I've heard it from other parents too. So for my children, especially during COVID, I saw this post on Facebook and it just made me laugh. It said, my entertainment budget is zero. My gas budget is zero. My food budget is $1,600 a month, because it literally everything, every emotion that they feel tends to come out in hunger, even if they're not hungry. And I talked to other parents and they say the same thing. So for example, they want to go to a movie. Oh, we can't go to a movie, right now because of the virus. That's what we call it, and they understand the virus. Okay, well, can I have ice cream? I'd like to go play with my friends. We can't play with your friends right now, because of the virus. Oh, okay, can I get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? But that's like every 10 minutes, it feels like. And I don't know if other parents deal with that too, but I just am curious because they have emotional eating issues. And do you have any suggestions for that?
I find too in my household that those behaviors are very, very true. It's happening in the house, but um, in the words of my husband, let's just find things to do. Let's go clean the yard. Let's go gardening. Let's get your mind thinking about something else instead of being bored, right? And so finding an alternative, because when they can't go play with their friends, or when they can't go to the movies, it's a sad feeling. I feel sad because I can't go, so now I'm gonna eat, right? And so now they're using eating as a tool to make them feel better, right? And so as parents and educators, then we would just have to think about, we do have to think about what else can we bring, and what else can we do to support our children in doing something else when we're feeling this way. And I have that issue too when I'm, I, when I'm sad, I eat. And unfortunately, my kids, when they see me, I would eat my ice cream and stuff. But it's kind of cute now, because then my son would say, when I want something and I'm a bit sad and I'm sitting there, and he'll be like, hey, Mom, want to play some D&D? And so it takes a little bit of time and practice, but then you'll get that right back too as well from them.
I want to take just a moment. Someone asked a little bit more technical question about, can you explain the pyramid model for listeners who don't know about it? So can you give us just a short explanation, Kiran?
Sure. So I apologize because I got disconnected for a minute. But I know Kim probably answered that question perfect. So pyramid model, it's basically a public health focus. Like the underlying pinnings have a public health model where it really talks about how, and it's a free resource. So if you wanted to like type in Google pyramid model, there's a ton of things that pop up. They have their own website, and really what the underlying focus is thinking about behavior as communication and teaching appropriate behaviors. And basically the focus is promoting social emotional development in children. And so what it talks about is how basically the foundation of the pyramid is for the educational focus, it's effective teaching forces. So that means teachers who are trained. And when we talk about the parent, they do have a parent component. So the parenting piece is having parents who, kind of have a little bit of that knowledge and that feeling and connection with children, right? But basically the premise is that if we in a classroom have intentional practices, 80% of our children will respond. So what that means is putting in interventions for all children, teaching children expectations, all children, right? Giving that foundation of social emotional development will basically have 80% of kids respond and be successful. And then what it talks about is how there is that remaining 20, but 15% of the kids might actually need an additional support. So they might need like an intervention. So an example of this is in a classroom or even at home, right? I have a routine for my kid, right? Let's just say I have a schedule. They know what they're supposed to be doing. So that's that beginning focus point. Like I've set up the stage for my kid to be successful by having like a visual schedule in place, right? And then, but maybe my kid still doesn't understand, then they need a little bit more support. So just the idea is that I could go on and on about pyramid because I'm such a pyramid lover. So I apologize. But the idea is that if you do things in the beginning to support social emotional development, you will have less challenges as children go through kind of their development.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that rounding out of how the parents can use that model as well. And funny enough, the time has gone by and we're almost at the end of our time today. And I really want to say thank you to the panelists, Kim, Kiran, Sonal, for sharing with us information about what is important to notice about the behaviors of children. And again, I just want to thank the co-sponsors, Clues, Minnesota Act Early, Help Me Grow, and Ramsey County Early Childhood Initiative. I hope that you enjoyed today. Stay well. Thank you.